February 9th, 2006. A construction crew breaks ground on a new housing development in Ipswich, England. Within hours, they make a discovery that sends shockwaves through the entire nation. A body, then another, and another. 5 young women, all found within days of each other. But this wasn't the beginning of the story. This was just the moment the world finally started paying attention to a killer who had been hunting for over a decade. This is the story of Steve Wright, a man whose ordinary appearance masked one of the most prolific serial killers in British history. A predator who targeted society's most vulnerable, leaving a trail of victims that investigators believe could number close to 200 women. The Midlands Ripper, the Suffolk Strangler, a monster hiding in plain sight. What makes this case particularly chilling isn't just the number of victims. It's how long he operated undetected, moving through different cities, different lives, always finding new hunting grounds. And when police finally connected the dots, they realized they might have been looking at decades of unsolved murders, all linked to one man. The 5 women found in Ipswich in 2006 were Tanya Nicole, 19 years old, Gemma Adams, 25, Annalie Alderton, 24, Paula Clennell, 24, and Annette Nichols, 29. All of them were working as prostitutes in the red light district of Ipswich. All of them vanished within a 6-week period. All of them were found dead, discarded like they didn't matter. But they did matter. They were daughters. Some were mothers. They had families who loved them, friends who cared, lives that meant something. And someone took all of that away. Before we dive deeper into this investigation and explore the full extent of Steve Wright's crimes, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Vault and hit that notification bell. We unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered, bringing you in-depth investigations into real crimes every single week. New videos drop regularly, and trust me, you won't want to miss what we uncover. Hit that like button if you're ready to go deep into one of Britain's most disturbing criminal cases. Steve Gerald James Wright was born on April 24, 1958, in the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. From the outside, his early life seemed unremarkable. His father was a military policeman, his mother a veterinary nurse. The family moved frequently due to his father's military career, living in Malta and Singapore before settling back in England. Young Steve was described as quiet, somewhat withdrawn, but nothing that raised alarm bells. He attended several schools due to the constant relocations, never quite fitting in anywhere. His father was strict by all accounts, maintaining military discipline in the household. Steve left school at 16 with few qualifications and drifted through various jobs. He worked as a steward with the Merchant Navy, traveled to various ports around the world. Later, he drove trucks. Then he worked on the ferries. Nothing stuck. Nothing satisfied him. But it was during these years, investigators now believe, that something dark began to take shape. In 1978, Wright married his first wife, Angela. They had a son together. On paper, he was trying to build a normal life. But the marriage was troubled from the start. Angela later reported that Wright had an obsession with prostitutes, frequently visiting red light districts. When she confronted him, he became defensive, secretive. The marriage lasted only a few years before falling apart. Wright moved on quickly. His second marriage, to a woman named Diane, lasted from 1987 to 1988. Again, the relationship crumbled. Diane later told investigators that Wright had become increasingly obsessed with prostitutes, spending money the couple didn't have, disappearing for hours at night. There was something compulsive about it, something he couldn't control, or perhaps it was something he didn't want to control. During the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, something else was happening across England. Women were disappearing. Prostitutes primarily from various cities. Norwich, Great Yarmouth, Felixstowe, London. These weren't high-profile cases. These weren't women whose disappearances made national headlines. These were society's invisible people, women working in dangerous conditions, women who could vanish and barely cause a ripple. Many of these cases went cold. Some bodies were never found. Others were discovered months or years later, too decomposed for proper forensic analysis with the technology available at the time. The investigations were separate, scattered across different jurisdictions, handled by different police departments who had no reason to connect them. But geographical profiling and timeline analysis conducted years later revealed a disturbing pattern. Steve Wright was in the area when many of these women disappeared. He was working jobs that gave him mobility, access to multiple cities, and crucially, anonymity. A steward traveling between ports, a truck driver making deliveries across the country, a ferry worker with irregular hours. In 1987, Wright was working at the Felixstowe docks when several prostitutes vanished from the area. He was living in Norwich in the early 1980s when at least 11 women disappeared from the city's red light district. He was in London during a spike in unsolved murders of sex workers between 1985 and 1988. Coincidence? Police don't think so. Let's talk about the investigation that initially targeted him. Because before Ipswich, before the 5 women found in 2006, there was another case, another woman, another death that should have been a red flag. In 1999, a woman named Natalie Pearman, 16 years old, vanished from Norwich. Her body was found months later in a lay-by. She'd been working as a prostitute. The investigation went nowhere. No suspects, no arrests. Case went cold. Steve Wright was living in Norwich at the time. He frequented the area where Natalie worked. According to later witness statements, he'd been seen talking to her, but nothing connected. No DNA was collected. No thorough investigation into local men who regularly used prostitutes. Natalie became another statistic, another unsolved murder in a file cabinet somewhere. The same thing happened again and again across different cities. Wright moved around frequently, changing jobs, changing addresses, but always gravitating back to red light districts, always surrounding himself with the same type of victim. By 2001, Wright had settled in Felixstowe, working nights as a steward at a local hotel. He met Pamela Wright, who would become his third partner. They moved in together. To neighbors, to co-workers, Steve Wright seemed like a harmless middle-aged man. Balding, glasses, soft-spoken. He was polite, kept to himself. Nothing about him screamed danger. But at night, when Pamela thought he was working or sleeping, Wright would drive to Ipswich, to the red light district on Portman Road and the surrounding streets. He became a regular, a familiar face. The women who worked there knew him, trusted him as much as anyone in that dangerous line of work trusts their clients. And then, in October 2006, women started disappearing. Tanya Nicole was the first to vanish, October 30th, 2006. She was 19 years old, working as a prostitute to fund a drug addiction. She'd been trying to get clean, according to her family. She wanted a better life. But addiction is a brutal master, and Tanya was trapped in its grip. She was last seen on Portman Road around midnight. Security cameras captured her walking along the street, looking for clients. Then she was gone. Her family reported her missing immediately. They knew something was wrong. Tanya always stayed in contact, always called her mother. When days passed without a word, alarm bells rang. But here's the devastating reality. When a prostitute with a drug problem disappears, police don't always jump into action. There's an assumption, often unspoken, that they've moved to a different city, or they're in jail, or they're too high to check in. The investigation into Tanya's disappearance was slow to start. Then Gemma Adams disappeared, November 15th, 2006. 25 years old, also working as a prostitute, also struggling with addiction. Gemma had a loving family, a mother who described her as funny, kind, and generous. But heroin had taken hold of her life, pushed her into sex work to pay for her habit. Gemma was last seen on Portman Road around 1 in the morning. Like Tanya, she simply vanished. Now police started to worry. 2 women, both prostitutes, both from the same small area, both gone without a trace within 2 weeks. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. On December 2nd, 2006, a member of the public discovered Gemma Adams's body in a brook at Hintlesham, about 8 miles outside Ipswich. She was naked, posed, left in shallow water. No obvious signs of violence, but the autopsy would later reveal she'd been asphyxiated. The discovery sent shockwaves through Ipswich. This wasn't a missing person case anymore. This was murder. 2 days later, on December 8th, Tanya Nicole's body was found in another brook at Copdock, just outside Ipswich. Same condition, naked, asphyxiated, carefully placed. The Suffolk police immediately launched a massive investigation. They knew they were looking for a serial killer. 2 murders, same victimology, same method, same dumping pattern. This was someone organized, someone methodical, someone who had done this before. But it got worse. On December 10th, the body of Adrien Olichon was discovered in Woodland, near Nacton. 24 years old, pregnant at the time of her death. She disappeared on December 3rd, just one day after Gemma's body was found. Adrien had been trying to earn money for Christmas, according to friends. She'd talked about getting out of sex work, about making a better life for herself and her unborn child. Her body showed signs of asphyxiation. She'd been posed like the others, left in a specific position. December 12th, 2 more bodies. Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols, found within hours of each other in separate locations near Levington. Both women had been asphyxiated. Both had been carefully arranged. Both had disappeared within the previous week. 5 women, all dead, all found within 10 days. The media descended on Ipswich like a hurricane. National news, international attention. The Suffolk Strangler, they called him. Comparisons to Jack the Ripper filled the headlines. Suffolk police were under enormous pressure. The public was terrified. Women working in prostitution across the region went into hiding. The streets emptied, and detectives knew one thing with absolute certainty. If they didn't catch this killer immediately, he would strike again. The investigation was massive. Over 450 officers assigned to the case. Thousands of hours of CCTV footage reviewed. Every vehicle seen in the red light district was traced and investigated. Police interviewed hundreds of men known to use prostitutes in the area. And they had forensic evidence. DNA collected from the victims' bodies, fibers, trace evidence. The killer had been careful, but not careful enough. On December 18, 2006, police arrested Tom Stevens, a local man known to be friends with some of the victims. Media attention focused on him immediately, but investigators weren't convinced. The evidence didn't quite fit. Something was off. The next day, December 19th, they arrested a second man, Steve Wright, age 48, living in Ipswich with his partner Pamela. He worked nights as a forklift driver, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But when police searched his home, his car, his work locker, they found everything they needed. DNA from all 5 victims, fiber evidence linking Wright to the bodies, phone records placing him in the areas where the women disappeared, witness statements from other sex workers who identified Wright as a regular client. Tom Stevens was released without charge. All attention turned to Steve Wright. Wright's interview with police was chilling in its ordinariness. He admitted to knowing the victims. Yes, he'd used prostitutes. Yes, he'd paid for sex with all 5 women. But he claimed it was coincidence, bad luck. He insisted he had nothing to do with their deaths. The evidence said otherwise. Forensic analysis revealed that DNA from Tanya Nicole, Gemma Adams, and Adrien Olichon was found in Wright's car, on the seats, on the interior surfaces. This wasn't transferred DNA, trace amounts that could be explained away. This was substantial biological evidence indicating all 3 women had been in his vehicle. Fibers from Wright's clothing were found on Paula Clennell's body. Carpet fibers from his home were discovered on Annette Nichols. Phone records showed Wright's mobile phone was active in the areas where bodies were dumped, at times consistent with when investigators believed the murders occurred. But perhaps most damning was the geographical pattern. All 5 women disappeared from a small area of Ipswich where Wright was known to cruise regularly. All 5 bodies were found in locations easily accessible from routes Wright drove frequently for work and personal travel. The trial began on January 14, 2008, at Ipswich Crown Court. It lasted nearly 6 weeks. The prosecution presented a mountain of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and circumstantial proof. They painted a picture of a man obsessed with prostitutes, a compulsive user of sex workers who had escalated from patron to predator. Peter Wright QC, the prosecutor, argued that Steve Wright had murdered all 5 women during paid sexual encounters. The motive, he suggested, was sexual gratification combined with a desire to exert ultimate control. Wright asphyxiated his victims, likely during sex, then carefully transported and displayed their bodies. The defense argued that while Wright admitted to having sex with the victims shortly before their deaths, someone else must have killed them. Coincidence, they claimed. Wrong place, wrong time. The DNA evidence only proved sexual contact, not murder. The jury didn't buy it. On February 21, 2008, Steve Wright was found guilty of all 5 murders. The verdict was unanimous. As the foreman read each guilty verdict, Wright showed no emotion. He sat still, expressionless, as if the trial was happening to someone else. The judge, Mr. Justice Gross, sentenced Wright to life imprisonment with a whole life tariff, meaning he would never be eligible for parole. He would die in prison. In his sentencing remarks, Justice Gross said Wright's crimes were of such gravity that no minimum term would suffice. He described the murders as cruel and targeted attacks on vulnerable women, committed with a level of planning that demonstrated Wright was an extremely dangerous individual. But here's where the story gets even darker, because those 5 women, tragic as their murders were, might only be the tip of the iceberg. After Wright's conviction, Suffolk police launched Operation Sumac, a cold case review of unsolved murders and disappearances of women across regions where Wright had lived and worked. The results were staggering. Investigators identified over 40 unsolved cases with potential links to Wright. Women who disappeared or were found murdered in Norwich during the 1980s when Wright lived there. Cases from London, Felixstowe, Great Yarmouth, all locations where Wright had resided or worked. In 2019, Suffolk police officially reopened investigations into the disappearances and murders of several women from the 1980s and 1990s, specifically looking at Steve Wright as a possible suspect. Victoria Hall, 17, disappeared from Trimley St. Mary in 1999. Her body was found months later. Wright was working in Felixstowe at the time. Natalie Pierman, the 16-year-old mentioned earlier, murdered in Norwich in 1999. Wright was in the area. He frequented the locations where she worked. Kelly Pratt, 29, disappeared from Norwich in 2000. Never found. Wright was living in Norwich. Vicky Glass, 21, found murdered in Great Yarmouth in 2000. Wright had recently moved from the area but still had connections there. And those are just the cases police are willing to publicly discuss. Behind the scenes, investigators have compiled a list of nearly 200 unsolved cases of murdered or missing women that match Wright's victimology and geographical pattern. 200. Think about that number. 5 murders got him a whole life sentence, but detectives believe that number could be 40 times higher. 40 times more families destroyed. 40 times more lives stolen. Decades of killing, moving from city to city, exploiting the fact that society doesn't pay attention when prostitutes disappear. DNA technology is being used to re-examine evidence from these cold cases. Samples preserved from crime scenes in the 1980s and 1990s are being compared to Wright's DNA profile. So far, several possible matches have been identified, but none strong enough to bring additional charges. The problem is deterioration. DNA degrades over time, especially when evidence wasn't stored properly decades ago. Many crime scenes were contaminated or poorly preserved because forensic science wasn't as advanced. Bodies left exposed to the elements for months or years left little usable evidence. But investigators aren't giving up. New technology emerges constantly. Genealogical DNA testing, the kind used to solve cases like the Golden State Killer, is being applied to some of these investigations. Touch DNA, trace evidence, fiber analysis, all being re-examined with modern techniques. In 2021, Suffolk police announced they'd identified genetic material from one of the 1980s Norwich cases that could potentially be matched to Wright. The investigation is ongoing. What makes Steve Wright particularly disturbing isn't just the suspected body count. It's how invisible he was, how ordinary. He held down jobs, maintained relationships, interacted with neighbors and co-workers without raising suspicion. People who knew him described him as quiet, boring even, forgettable. That's the mask, the facade of normalcy that allowed him to operate for decades. Pamela Wright, his partner at the time of his arrest, was completely blindsided. She told police she had no idea. He was home most nights. He didn't seem violent. There were no obvious red flags. She genuinely believed she was living with a harmless, slightly dull, middle-aged man. After Wright's conviction, criminologists and psychological profilers studied his case extensively. Dr. Paul Britton, a forensic psychologist who worked on several high-profile British cases, suggested Wright likely started killing much earlier than 2006. The confidence, the organization, the specific victimology, all point to someone who had refined his method over many years. Serial killers don't typically start their careers in their late 40s. They start earlier, develop patterns, evolve their techniques. If Wright killed 5 women in 6 weeks at age 48, what was he doing in his 20s, his 30s? The answer, investigators believe, is hunting, perfecting his craft. learning how to kill without getting caught. Wright targeted prostitutes specifically for several reasons. They were accessible to him. He was already using their services regularly, so there was a built-in cover story for being in red light districts. They were vulnerable, often working alone at night in dangerous conditions. And perhaps most cynically, society didn't care about them the way it cared about other victims. When a sex worker disappears, investigations are slower, less thorough. Media attention is minimal. Public outcry is muted. Wright exploited all of that. He found the perfect victim pool, and he hunted within it for decades. Let's talk about the asphyxiation method, because it tells us something important about Wright's psychology. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't stab or shoot his victims. He used his hands, his body weight, possibly ligatures. This is intimate killing, close contact, watching the life drain from someone's eyes. For Wright, this wasn't about anger or rage. Psychological profiles suggest he killed for control, the ultimate domination. These women who sold their bodies for money, who maintained a degree of control over their transactions, Wright stripped them of that. He reduced them to objects, then disposed of them like trash. The posing of the bodies is significant too. After death, Wright carefully arranged his victims. Some were placed in cruciform positions, arms spread. Others were laid out precisely, positioned in shallow water or secluded woods. This staging indicates a need to display his work, to create a scene. It's not enough to kill. He needed to present the bodies in a specific way. What do you think that was about? Some kind of ritual? A message to police? Or simply his signature? His way of claiming ownership over the murders? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Today, Steve Wright is incarcerated at HMP Long Lartin in Worcestershire, a maximum security prison housing some of Britain's most dangerous criminals. He maintains his innocence regarding the 5 murders he was convicted of. He's never confessed, never shown remorse, never acknowledged what he did. And he's never been charged with any of the dozens of other murders investigators believe he committed. Families of the suspected additional victims live in limbo. No closure, no justice. Just the terrible possibility that their loved one's killer is in prison, but will never be held accountable for their specific loss. The case raises uncomfortable questions about how society values different lives. If Steve Wright had targeted middle-class women, university students, professionals, would he have been caught sooner? Would those early cases in Norwich and London have received more investigative resources, more media attention, more public pressure to solve? Probably. The 5 women murdered in Ipswich in 2006 finally got justice, but only because their deaths happened close together, in a small city where the pattern was impossible to ignore. The women who came before them, the invisible victims from the 1980s and 1990s, they're still waiting. Police continue to work these cold cases. Families continue to hope for answers. And Steve Wright continues to sit in his cell, taking whatever secrets he's keeping to his grave. Because that's what will likely happen. Unless Wright decides to confess, unless some dramatic forensic breakthrough occurs, most of those suspected murders will remain unsolved. The Midlands Ripper's full body count will never be known. What we do know is this: Steve Wright is one of Britain's most prolific serial killers. 5 confirmed victims, potentially 200 total, decades of hunting, and a chilling demonstration of how easily a predator can move through society undetected when he chooses the right victims. This case haunts everyone who studies it, not just because of the lives lost, but because of how many might have been saved if society had cared sooner, if investigations into missing sex workers had been more thorough, if red light districts had better protection, if anyone had connected the dots earlier. But they didn't, and women died because of it. If this investigation into one of Britain's most disturbing serial killers has captivated you, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vault. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into real cases that deserve to be remembered. Drop a like if you appreciate the thorough research we put into every single video. And please, leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you think investigators will ever prove Wright's connection to those earlier cases? What's your theory on his total victim count? Let me know below. Remember, these aren't just stories. These are real people. Tanya, Gemma, Annalie, Paula, and Annette. They deserve to be remembered as more than just victims of the Suffolk Strangler. They were human beings with families, with lives that mattered. And the dozens of other women, the ones whose cases remain unsolved, They deserve justice too. Steve Wright remains in prison, serving his whole life sentence. He's now in his mid-60s. By all accounts, he spends his days in isolation, reading, watching television, maintaining his innocence. He'll die behind bars. But the shadow he cast, the lives he destroyed, that legacy will outlive him. This is True Crime Vault, unlocking the cases that deserve to be remembered.